to episode 170 of the CRICKETher Weekly. Now, as you'll know, if you're a regular viewer, we always record on a Sunday. Well, we sometimes record on a Saturday, we occasionally record on a Monday, but it's a Tuesday. What's going on? Well, we wanted to wait until the end of the test because we've just finished the test and we're still in Nottingham, so the test is over now. But what happened yesterday afternoon was we got word that a huge story was going to break at midnight last night. So at 1 minute past midnight, the Commission for Equity in Cricket released its report, which we've been waiting for months and months and months. And so we wanted to be able to talk about that on the podcast today. And that's what we're going to be coming back to in the kind of second part, in part two. But first of all, the test. We've just finished it. We just about struggled up this morning on the morning after our first ever 5-day test covering women's cricket. And it's been quite a run, hasn't it, Raf?
Yeah, absolutely. We've had lots of records broken. I think highest run rate ever in a test. We've had a double century from Tammy Beaumont. We had a couple of other centuries in the game. We've had a couple of bowlers taking 10 wickets. And it has been a bit of a roller coaster ride, and I will say that all of the talk for the first 3 days actually was dead pitch. They've ruined it by creating a dead pitch. We're never going to have 20 wickets on each team fall on this pitch.
We need a sixth day.
Yeah, we need a sixth day, and also 5 days it's just going to peter out into a very boring draw. Then Sunday, day 4 happened, and it was like, oh, wickets, that's what they are. And so, yeah, it was just, all of the stuff below the line on The Guardian for the first 3 days was how do we generate more exciting women's tests and how do we make it more of an even contest between bat and ball. But in the end, ultimately, we didn't even need most of the 5th day. Okay, that was partly because of some probable frailties in the England mentality of the way that they were batting against Australia. But actually, it was really exciting, and both captains reflected at the end that having that 5th day was great because it meant that the match could come to a natural conclusion rather than them having to manufacture a result, as has always been the case before.
Yeah, 20 wickets taken in the test, culminating with a fantastic performance by Ash Gardner on the final day. Now, Ash Gardner, you spoke to her in the press conference at the end of day 4, and what did she say to you, Raf? She said that spin was going to play a big role, didn't she?
Oh yeah, spin going to play a big role, yeah. I was like, I wonder if England are listening.
And well, I wonder if Ash Gardner was listening to Ash Gardner's press conference, because she came back on the final day and cleaned up all the wickets on the final day. Yeah. She ended up with 8 wickets in the innings, 13 wickets in the match, was it?
Yeah, 12 I think.
12 wickets in the match.
Yeah.
So an absolutely amazing performance, and just eclipsing even the performances of Tammy Beaumont and Sophie Eccleston, both of whom were awesome as well.
But I mean, England, weird thing with picking their 11, and then Sophie Eccleston took almost all the wickets and just bowled almost for the whole of both of the Australia innings. It was a phenomenal effort by her, but you've got to kind of say England really strange tactics to go into that test with one frontline spinner. And I know you'd reflected in your CRICKETher piece that you thought that John Lewis had fundamentally misread the pitch.
Yeah, I don't really understand it particularly, and I mean, they continued to claim, when they were doing the media rounds last night, that they hadn't misread things. They got all the big calls right. Yeah. But I mean, at the end of the day, John Lewis played 250 first-class games, red ball games in England. He's played a number of games at Trent Bridge, and yet they got it so hopelessly wrong. And it was Australia that were able to use their kind of third spinner almost. Although Ashley Gardner's really not a third spinner. I mean, Australia treat her as a proper frontline bowler, quite rightly, because of her performance. But she was in a way the third spinner, and they were able to ignore her. Alana King didn't bowl at all in the last morning.
Exactly.
Nor did Jess Johnson.
And apparently Alana King was a bit annoyed about that because she was about to be brought on to bowl, and then Australia or Ash Gardner took the last 2 wickets, and Kingy was a bit like, oh, hang on. So yeah, they really did wrap up things very quickly on the 5th day, Australia. But ultimately, we did need that 5th day, despite the fact that we've had the best weather for a women's test since I can remember, actually. Syd, should all women's tests be 5 days?
Well, I mean, okay, the first thing to state is that they're not going to be, because Australia have already scheduled their test against India at the WACA.
South Africa, I think.
Oh, sorry. Yes, you're right. South Africa. Sorry, it's India. India are playing England in a test and at a very similar time. So they've scheduled that test at the WACA. That's going to be 4 days. I'm not sure about the England-India test, but going forward, we're still going to have some 4-day tests. Yeah, but you made an interesting point yesterday, Raf.
Yeah, well, what I was saying was that the 5th day has been brilliant, and it's obviously generated a lot of interest in this match. And I don't see any reason why all women's Ashes tests now shouldn't be 5 days, because they're the kind of almost still the centrepiece of the women's test calendar, aren't they?
Yeah, and the ECB have laid down a marker
They
now.
have, exactly, and we were saying yesterday in the press box that so much of the developments and the advancements in women's cricket come about when the ECB does something and Cricket Australia goes, well, why aren't we doing that? And we're going to be one better. And then the ECB go, well, they're doing that now. We've got to be one better than them. So it's this kind of one-upmanship or one-up womanship that takes place between the two boards. So I do think now that, as you say, ECB have laid down a marker. Ashes tests are much more likely to all be 5 days. Don't see any reason why that shouldn't be the case. The reason that I've always been a little bit reluctant to push for 5-day women's test cricket, though, is because I've been worried that it will put the administrators from other boards off actually staging more tests. Because they'll go, well, it's not just finding the resources for 4 days, we've got to find them for 5 days. I'd rather that we accept that some women's tests will still be 4 days, because then we will see the likes of India, South Africa, potentially even New Zealand, if somebody can knock the heads together of some people at New Zealand cricket playing tests. And that's really important to kind of revive the format going forwards. So as I said on Twitter, let's not make the perfect 5 days be the enemy of the good 4 days.
Okay, now we've had a few questions from our friends on
Yeah.
Twitter and things on social media. So what are people asking, Raf?
Okay, we did have a question from James, who said lots of big tour groups of Australia fans at Edgbaston, so for the men's test. I assume they'll be at Lord's next week for the second men's test. So why aren't they there in numbers at Trent Bridge? I actually thought that comment was a little bit unfair, because we had a record crowd for a women's test.
Yeah, and there were some parts of Australia.
Yeah, there
definitely.
were.
So some people had made the trip.
Yeah, we saw Diane Valley. Hello, Diane. And there were some, former players who travelled over from Australia as well.
Yeah, and there were ordinary fans that were clearly the people that had come over to
Yeah.
the men. So some people have made the trip across the Midlands. It's a long way across the Midlands. There be bears, apparently. No, I mean the honest answer to this is that it was a really good crowd, but I think we've still got some way to go before the tour groups are doing things like that. And I'm guessing that what they've organised is like the tourist trip bit for the tourists for the. You see what I'm going. They've gone and done touristing on the sites.
The 5-day men's test, and then between
And
that
then
it'll
they'll be doing
find your own
sightseeing
activities.
and that kind of thing. So but definitely there were some people there. So some people did make that trip.
Okay. Richard. Actually, we've got a couple of questions on a similar point, but Richard says, hi Raf, have you any thoughts about how red ball cricket could fit into the domestic schedule? 3 3-day games in a group of 4 and then a final maybe. It's just knowing where it would fit into the current calendar. And we did also have Joseph ask a question about do the test playing countries need to announce a domestic multi-day competition in the next 5 years, even if it means starting small? I guess let's think about the English context, Sid.
Yeah, well, I think that getting the domestic players playing red ball cricket is a really important thing. And it's a really important thing just from a selfish perspective of the ECB. Here's how you make the case to the ECB. We'll see what we see in the next couple of weeks, but my guess is that actually that the test will be as close as England get to winning the Ashes. England weren't a million miles away in the test. And I think there was a genuine chance they could have won that game if things had gone a little bit differently.
Yeah.
So the test is where England can kind of get ahead in the Ashes. So if we promote the red ball game into the domestic level, and if we start playing, perhaps initially just 3 red ball games a season, maybe just north v south games, so get the next level of players involved in playing them, then that is going to give the England team of 3 years' time or 5 years' time an edge going into that test match. And that's how you select the ECB. You say, if you want to beat the Aussies, we need to win the test. So let's promote that red ball cricket at the domestic level, and because it's not going to be massively expensive to do, because we have got enough full-time professionals to be able to do that.
Yeah, and the other thing is that red ball domestic cricket is not really on the agenda in Australia at all. So I think we've even had this conversation before, that actually if England can get ahead by doing that, then it does really stand them in good stead. Because of course the test is still worth 4 points, and there's now been a lot of talk about whether or not that should be the case, because Australia have gone 4-0 up and England are left needing to win 5 out of the 6 remaining white ball games, which just feels a ridiculous prospect that's never going to happen in a million years. But the test remains the centrepiece of the Ashes. It's very important.
Yeah, although of course, if England introduced red ball cricket, just as you mentioned earlier, that would be the biggest thing that would make Australia go, oh, maybe we should introduce red ball cricket for our domestic players.
You just wait, Sid. It's great, isn't it? Brilliant. And we had a question from Thomas. Okay, we have sort of just answered this. He says, with England A successful in the T20s and giving a few of our T20 players practice, so England A have been playing this series against Australia A and they've won every game. He says, might we have a good chance in the Ashes T20s of taking 1 or even 2 matches, particularly if there's rowdy home support at the big stadia? We know lots of tickets have been sold. We've just written off England's chances of winning a series, but I suppose this is a slightly separate question. Could they take 1 or 2 games in the white ball stuff?
Well, it's true that England A have done very well. I think that it is a very different A side to Australia's A side. There's been a lot more caps in the England A team, so a lot more England have been sending players to kind of warm up potentially ahead of the T20 series. So your likes of Maya Boucher, Alice Capsey, Lauren Winfield-Hill's been playing, which has an absolute pile of caps. Whereas the Australia A team has contained more players who are their kind of next generation players.
Yeah.
So they've treated it a little bit differently. So it's perhaps unsurprisingly that England have won that. I don't think we're expecting any huge surprise in the T20 squad. That's being announced later today.
Well, we're expecting Capsey back, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean that would seem very likely.
And in terms of the Test squad, who might get sent back to their
there
regions.
was a big hint in the press conference that Lauren Filer, wasn't going to remain with the squad for the T20s, so she'll go back to that.
Yeah, John Lewis basically said, we see her very much as a Test player. I'm not convinced that's a great thing that you really want to hear if you are a professional female cricketer, given that they play like 1 or 2 tests a year, but that is what he said nonetheless. So not necessarily expecting to see her in the white ball stuff, but hey, she's made a Test debut and taken a few wickets.
She's got more Test caps than I'll ever get.
And she's also got Elise Perry out twice, which is more than most cricketers in the world can say. So not a bad game for her. Anyway, it'll be interesting to see what happens.
The bottom line is that this as time has moved on, and the current stat, at time of writing, so to speak, is that Australia have lost 1 white ball game in the last 2 years.
Wow.
Can you really see them losing 5 in the next couple of weeks?
Doesn't seem very likely. Obviously, England and particularly Heather Knight have still got to talk a good game, but it doesn't seem very likely, does it?
Right, shall we move on to
Part
the big
2.
one, Raf?
Yeah.
So, tell the viewers initially, because a lot of the viewers overseas won't really be aware of, how do we get here? What is the Commission for Equity in Cricket, and how did they end up writing a report which was delivered last night? Okay.
Well, the Commission was actually sort of set up and put in place by the ECB, who, it was a really positive move by them actually, because there aren't that many national governing bodies of sport in this country or globally who I suspect would open themselves up to this level of critique. But nonetheless, the ECB did commission this. I believe it was a couple of years ago, at the height of the Azim Rafiq kind of difficulties. A lot of stuff was coming out about racist things that had been said, about racist incidents which had taken place. And the ECB decided to commission this group of people to take loads of evidence. So they've spoken to people across the game about different types of discrimination in cricket. So it looks at gender discrimination, but also obviously racism, racial discrimination, and socio-economic difficulties as well. So socio-economic discrimination, so class.
Yeah. Now we're going to talk in particular about the aspect that as it pertains to women's cricket, but it's really important to acknowledge up front that the report is about all forms of discrimination, and the report goes into an awful lot of detail about race discrimination and class discrimination, about the kind of dominance of the public schools and the dominance of white people within the game. And those two things are really important. But what we're going to do, because we focus on the women's game, we're just going to focus on the aspects of the report that pertain to the women's game. So, and there's really kind of two kind of chunks to it. There's some stuff about governance, about the way the sport is run, which we'll get to in a minute. But let's first talk about pay, because there's some quite radical recommendations, isn't there? And in fact, some of these potentially started with you, Raf, because you had a conversation with the people from the Commission for Equity. And I was in the other room kind of, earwigging, if you like. I could hear what you were saying. I couldn't hear what was being said to you. And you were urging that the ECB should move to 100% equal pay within the next few years.
Yeah.
That's absolute equal pay. So the women in the 100 earning exactly the same as the men, earning the same appearance fees, match fees, base contract rates, marketing money, all of that stuff. And you came out of there and I was like, the Commission aren't going to recommend that. That would be going far too far. These people will clearly have been selected very carefully to ensure they won't recommend anything too radical. And yet, Raf.
Yeah, well, they have indeed recommended it. We got hold of an advance copy of the report yesterday, didn't we? And we were both flicking through and sort of reading bits out to one another. We were just absolutely flabbergasted, because it is. It's actually quite difficult reading in places. It's not that I'm necessarily surprised by what I've read, because I knew that a lot of this was going on, but it's so rare that that you actually read a report where they tell you what's really going on, because so often these things kind of are commissioned and they become more of a PR exercise. And they also become a kind of, there are little pockets of the game that maybe have a bit of a problem, but overall everything's rosy in the garden. This is the complete opposite of that. This says that, just thinking about the sexism and the misogyny aspect, it says it's totally rife. It's everywhere across the game. There are no pockets of the game that really escape from this critique, that women's cricket is routinely marginalised, women's teams routinely face discrimination, and there's some really horrible stories in there about the kind of discrimination that people are facing across the game in terms of if you're a female umpire, a female coach, a female player, and you're trying to just go about your business in women's cricket and in cricket as a woman, and you can't, because there are all of these, as they label them, type Ks, these white, middle class, affluent men of a certain age who run cricket and who rule cricket and who just across England and Wales cricket are the ones in charge. So you can't escape them. Sorry, that doesn't really answer your question about pay.
Okay, so what recommendations have been made about pay in the end?
Well, incredibly radical, to an absolutely stupefying extent. I mean, they have. I did give evidence, and I'm not gonna take credit for the fact that this recommendation for equal pay has been made, because I'm sure there were lots of people also recommending this. But it was something I said that we need to have. I think I said equal pay for all international cricketers and all domestic cricketers within 10 years or something like that. So they've actually gone with an even shorter time frame than that. So all pay needs to be equal across domestic cricket by 2029, and all pay needs to be equal across international cricket, so all England cricketers paid the same across 2030. Now, there's a small caveat, which is that it's average pay, and that the Commission accept that some cricketers will be paid more and some might be paid less, but average pay. And it's not just, we've been really critical, haven't we, of New Zealand cricket or the BCCI going, we've got equal pay, when all it is equal match fees. This is not just equal match fees, although it is that, it's equal salaries, and also equal commercial pay. So they've got to make sure that the commercial deals that are in place for the men's and women's cricket teams are the same.
Yeah, so they can't argue, basically. The Commission has given them no loopholes to argue, Ben Stokes is of more commercial value, therefore we'll give him a separate commercial contract.
Which is always the excuse.
They've really explicitly gone, you preempted any of that. You can't do that, guys. If you're going to have equal pay, it has to be properly, genuinely equal.
Yeah, and in the 100's got to be equal by 2025.
By 2025. This is going to cost. I worked this out. This is going to cost the ECB something in the region of £6 million per year.
Well, that's it. But you're talking about if they raise the women's salaries to meet the men's, aren't you? So
now, of course, there's another option.
Yeah. Well, as I said in the Guardian piece, you take from Peter and you give it to Pauline. So you lower the men's and then you raise the women's, and that's where you get the money from. I did also say that amongst the type Ks who are running English cricket, that's going to go down like a bucket of cold sick. So we await the
amongst
ECB's...
the male players. I mean, the trouble is that that only this year they've had to raise the salaries for a lot of the male players. They've raised the salaries for members of the England white ball squad to play in the 100, because members of the England white ball squad were going, no, I can't be bothered.
But
so,
I mean, we were very critical of that. So we are not saying that we don't support these recommendations. We do. Our concern is how the ECB responds. Our concern is that the ECB just turns around and says, I'm sorry, but that's not possible. But that's not the Commission's responsibility. The Commission are a lobbying group, ultimately, who have to fight for change. And we're prepared to support them in fighting for change. So it's radical, but it's really important.
And the battle's not won, is it? Because the ECB are under no obligation, are they, Raf, to implement these recommendations?
No, they aren't. I mean, we have to give them credit so far. They have actually already enacted the first recommendation, which was a full, absolute and frank apology for the discrimination that's happened, and they did do that. They've done that. At 1 minute past midnight, they issued their public letter of apology, and it does actually say we're really sorry to all of the women who historically we've treated really badly, and we do commit to change. So they are, they are doing things, they are responding to the Commission already, but the next step is, they've said it's like a 3-month group who are going to meet and decide how they're going to try and implement the rest of the recommendations. So, as you say, the battle is not won. But there is another aspect to the recommendations about governance.
Let's talk about governance, because that's also an important thing going forward, that we need to talk about the way that the game is governed in England. So, at the moment, the dominant voice in cricket governance are the men's first class counties. So, and these are really men's first class counties. I know that there are women's teams attached to them, but essentially they're 99.8% of their priorities are their men's teams. So those men's first class counties dominate governance. But the report says that what the ECB need to do very quickly is move to a situation where women's cricket has an equal status in governance with men's cricket, and with them explicitly with the men's first class counties. And
an equal voice.
Exactly.
An equal voice.
Now, this isn't quite the same, because there's another recommendation that says that men and women need to be equally represented. But it's important not to confuse those two recommendations. So men and women need to be equally represented is an important thing, but the men's and women's games needing to be equally represented is also important.
So there's no reason why a women's region could not be represented at the ECB by a man, but as long as that man was genuinely representing the interests of the women's region. But you're right, there's two slightly different things. The other thing that the report is very critical of is the fact that I think it's all bar 1 or 2 chief executives of counties in this country are white men, and that's just not good enough. Of course, women are equally capable of running men's cricket as men are of running women's cricket. So there needs to be thought given to both of those issues. But you actually highlight one of the big problems with that in your CRICKETher piece this morning, don't you, Sid?
Yeah, when it's literally how the question is, how do you do that? At the moment, we've got these 8 women's regions, but the 8 women's regions don't really exist as independent entities in the way that the men's first class counties do. The 8 women's regions are effectively owned by the ECB. They're all utterly dependent upon their parent men's first class counties for facilities and for some degree of sharing of resources. So they're sharing resources like media people. They're sharing facilities like training facilities and nets and things like that. So it's quite difficult to see how you create a governance structure out of that, and that's going to be a real challenge for the Commission going forward. Perhaps what they need, Raf, is to talk to an expert in sports governance with some experience in cricket. How would you feel about that?
Well, I'm available, Claire. Hello. No.
For a small fee.
No. I think that one of the answers to that is something I have genuinely spoken about, written about, and mooted before, which is that you have the 18 men's first class counties over here represented. You then set up an equivalent body that represents the 8 women's regions. So it's a kind of form of devolution of governance. So you have the main ECB people at the top here, and then you have your men's stuff here, and your women's stuff here, and that gets round your issue about, well, you'd have to have what was the maths, two and a quarter representatives of each region, so that it was equal voting to the men. So that could potentially be a way of doing it and meeting the criteria that are in the recommendations, and that could be quite interesting.
Okay, well, there's going to be plenty more of this. You'll be able to read so much about this in the newspapers. Raf's got an article about it in the Guardian. Yeah. Also, make sure you read Jonathan Liu's piece in the Guardian, because it's a really important piece as well. And let's continue to hold the ECB to account for this, because this, in a way, we've only done the easy bit so far. The easy bit is apologising, and that's not to say that necessarily is easy, but ultimately, there needs to be serious change as a result of that, and that's what we will be attempting to hold the ECB to account for. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much for watching, for sticking with us for 25 minutes. We'll be back on Sunday, hopefully. We'll be at a Sparks game on Sunday, so we're looking forward to that. That'll be just after the first T20. So we'll see you then.
Bye.
Bye.